I'm here with Dr. Jill Pelaez Baumgaertner, Professor of English and Dean of Humanities and Theological Studies at Wheaton College. She is also the author of several books of poetry in addition to other works. Thank you, Jill, for joining us today.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
As you know, Frederick Beaker will soon be turning 90 years old. Is there anything you would like to wish him for this great milestone?
I wish Fred many, many birthday blessings and want to quote to him the words which first captured my attention before I really became a part of the Christian conversation. I was in a church service and heard these words, which are very familiar words now, but which at the time I was hearing for the first time. And it is the several verses from the book of Numbers in the Old Testament. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. So may the Lord continue to make his face shine upon you, Fred.
Thank you, Jill. I'm sure Mr. Beaker will greatly appreciate hearing from you. Next, can you tell me how you first learned about Mr. Beaker?
In the fall of 1985, when I was a junior professor here at Wheaton, Fred came to Wheaton as our first Kilby professor. He was here for a semester, a part of a semester, teaching, lecturing, taking in the Christian college ambiance, which was to him a revelation. He had never been in a place like Wheaton before. He writes about this in his book, Telling Secrets. I was already familiar with his book, Telling the Truth, the Gospel as Tragedy, Comedy, and Fairy Tale. But then I began to read the book of Beb about the same time that I was discovering Fred in person and also discovering the work of Flannery O'Connor and writing a book on her work, which Fred very kindly agreed to contribute to in the form of a preface.
What would you say most attracts you to Mr. Beaker's writing?
Both its humanity, its gutsiness, and its truth-telling, its fresh angle of vision. One of my favorite books of his is his novel about Jacob, son of laughter, and in it, Fred is a poet. What he does is he reminds us that Jacob, although he has a few things in common with us, lived in a very different time and place. And Fred immerses us, plunges us into that world with all of its unfamiliar smells and images and practices such as polygamy. It was quite a remarkable piece of writing, and it really did change, as I read it, change my vision of what happens in the Old Testament to various characters and how they act out God's commands.
Great, thank you. How would you say that Mr. Beaker's writing has influenced your own career?
Because of Fred's influence, I am not afraid to tell the truth in my poetry about human nature, and in particular about doubt as an important element of faith. And I've also grown in my respect for an understanding of the importance of silence. We cannot hear God's still small voice if we are constantly immersed in this world of chatter. And I think email chatter is probably the worst of all. But God is there in hidden places, and we have to be astute to his voice, even when it seems to be silent.
You mentioned a couple of different of Mr. Beaker's books. Which of his books overall would you say have meant the most to you?
I think the book of Beb introduced me to a vision which included exaggeration for the purpose of telling the truth. Beb is a very unusual character, and what was interesting to me at the time was that he was very familiar in some ways to the O'Connor characters I was reading and writing about. Although, as Fred told me later, and as he wrote in the preface to my book on O'Connor, he postponed reading Flannery O'Connor because he didn't want to be too influenced by her, because they were tilling the same ground. They may be tilling the same ground, but it is ground which has the scandal of the cross at the center, and each approaches this with a very different kind of voice. So the Book of Beb was in some ways scandalous, but that is because it was about the scandal of the cross. That is one of my favorites. But I also think Telling Secrets has meant a great deal to me. I think probably because part of it is about his experience here at Wheaton College, but also part of it is about the importance of silence, as I have mentioned before, and of God's voice in the midst of that silence. God's voice the silence is often an answer, even though we don't recognize it as such.
How would you say Mr. Beaker has inspired any of your own work?
I realize that after reading Fred's work, after talking with him for so many years, and reading him beside Flannery O'Connor and Walker Percy and Denise Levertov, Fred's work has made me realize that whenever I write, I am writing as the person I am. And the person I am is Christian. So that reality is going to be at the heart of everything I do, whether or not I intend for it to be there. Even in the most secular seeming efforts, it will be there. I can trust it to be. I don't have to work at injecting meaning into my work. I simply trust the work.
More broadly speaking, what influence would you say that Mr. Beaker has had on Christianity and the world at large?
I think, like any artist, Fred helps us to open our eyes and pay attention. I think, though, in the case of the writer with Christian roots, that world to which the reader is invited to pay attention is a world in which the ordinary connects with something very much larger than itself. So Fred encourages us to find God in hidden places, to tell the truth, to realize that telling the truth is often costly, but it is essential, and we must heed God's silence as a presence and as an answer.
I realize that this next question is difficult, but if you were to sum up Fred in a few words, what would you say?
I know of no other living writer who uses language with such style and, yes, with such grace. I think that is because Fred realizes that words are what we've got, but they can only go so far. He is grounded in the gospel, which crosses, and I use that as a pun, it crosses his life and his art. It is a unique angle of vision.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay.